It's Friday. It's been a good week. We've learned a lot. And we are ready to welcome our final keynote. Now, I have been to a lot of conferences over the years. But apart from the keynotes that we heard this week, I can remember about 3 keynotes from all of those conferences. And one of them was actually performed by today's keynote speaker back in 2012. But he didn't know that. And this is the last keynote of this year's event, and I could think of no better person to round off our theme than today's keynote speaker. And it is our National Librarian, Aslak Sira Myhre. And Aslak is a former journalist, politician, and the former director of the House of Literature, as well as the head of an organization that promotes good reading habits. You like to hear that, right? He's still an activist, a football enthusiast, and a prominent leader of our National Library. Aslak is giving us a keynote entitled Change and Constant, the Role of the Modern Library. And I, for one, am thrilled to hear this topic talked of more. So enjoy. Welcome, Aslak.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me here. And maybe thank you for that introduction, because if you only have remembered 3 and I'm speaking now, I feel like it's very difficult to live up to the expectancy. But I'll try at least to tell you some things from the heart. You know a lot more than me about your profession. You are librarians, you work with health tech, you work with universities, hospitals, doctors, you work with organizing this knowledge. I know nothing about that. So I'm not intending to tell you what your job will be like. I have no intention of knowing better than you what you do at your daily work. What I intend to do is say something about the library and the future of library and knowledge. And hopefully some of the things I talk about will also have relevance for you, both in your vocation and also in your intellectual questions. For me, being a non-librarian, starting up at this job about 10 years ago, I was very surprised to learn about the habits of librarians, not just in Norway, but internationally. One of the habits of librarians are meeting at conferences. I know about no vocation that meets as often as librarians. When I travel around Norway, I meet, and the last 10 years, I met the same directors and special librarians at least 2 or 3 times a year at different conferences. Internationally, I meet the same people there too. At IFLAs, at Sennels, at conferences and so on. And the second habit that surprised me was that every time librarians meet, and you meet often, you discuss, what is a library? You shouldn't announce this very loudly. Because for the rest of the world, it would be a bit surprising that of all groups in the world, librarians are the ones that know the least about what a library is. Most other people know what a library is. Their answer might not be right. They might not have a foggiest about what an academic library or a national library or a civic library is. They know about public libraries, but they have a clear ID. And it's always good to have a clear ID, even if it's the wrong ID. I do not think that doctors and nurses meet 3 times a year to discuss what is a hospital. Neither do plumbers or carpenters have these kinds of meetings. Not even teachers discuss what is a school as often as we discuss what a library is. And even more important, what is the future of the library? and underlying the question, does the library have a future? That's always, it's been there all the time. 2012, when I did that keynote, still the question was, does the library have a future? My impression is that if you traveled 1,000 years back in time to the roots of the European libraries, the monasteries of Europe, the book collections of the Christian church, and you met the librarians there, the question they would be asking themselves is, does our library have a future? Why? Why is this such a burning question for librarians? I think there are at least 3 different answers. One of them is that we are, in a way, academics or working with academics. But our role in academia and our role in this world is a meta role. There's a reason it's called metadata. So our role in itself is not to be a book, but to have knowledge about the book. As a National Library, we don't make people read, we tell stories about the books people read. So meta and looking at ourselves from the outside is partly a basic part of our vocation and how we think. Secondly, because we have this role, I think we always feel a bit lesser. We are the helpers of others, particularly in academic libraries. We are not the professors, we are not the doctors, we are not the researchers, we are not the ones who utilize the knowledge, we are the helpers who give the knowledge. So, and I'm not talking about a conscious feeling, but subconsciously, I think somehow we have a feeling of being lesser. And we fight that by answering the question why we are needed. We are needed too, is the answer we really give in these conferences. Not why are libraries needed, but why are librarians needed too, in addition to the others. But there is also a third reason that is more important than these more existential questions. And that is that our world is rapidly changing. Because digitization of knowledge, digitization of consume of knowledge, digitization to access to knowledge, and the digitization of searching knowledge changes our vocation more than many others. We could talk about the doctors who do their surgery with robots and say, oh, it's changed a lot. But most doctors do not use robots. Most doctors do very much the same as they always have done. And their change is what they do on their computers instead of with pen and paper when they take notes. For us, our universe is changing and has changed extremely. So in many ways, we do have a good reason to ask these questions. But, and this is my first and most important point, digitization and all the question it raises is not a challenge to the role of the library. It is a challenge to the role of the librarian. And that is a huge difference. And I do not think we should question the library because our profession changes. So if we are going to pose the question, what is the future of something? It is not the future of the institutions we are working in. It's not the future of the library as a center of knowledge. The question we should ask is, what is the future of the library? Librarian, I mean. What would our role be like? What do we do? But we should not drag our institutions with us in that existential crisis. Because the library as a center of knowledge has not become less important, it has become more important, even though it changes. But for the librarian, things have changed a lot and rapidly. from cataloging cards to mark, and from mark and maybe not to bib frame. That's where we are now. 5-10 years ago, everybody was talking about open linked data, remember? Everybody was talking about bib frame and the future and how mark would be replaced by this, and this was the essential issue, and everybody should adapt, right? There's not much talk about that now. I've been working with open linking data, actually working with it for quite a while. We passed it. Now everybody talks about ChatGPT. In 2 years, somebody will talk about something else. This is a challenge to librarians. This is a challenge to us. Digitization means that our users, our lenders, our academics, whoever we call them, basically have the same access to knowledge as us. They have the same access to information databases, and to search. And sometimes, I hope this doesn't go for you, but for public libraries it happens, national libraries too, our users will find better results on their mobile phones than we find in our catalogs. That's a real problem. That's a challenge for us. I come back to this point, but I'll give you some of the background, because as I said, I'm not a librarian and I do not come from your part of the library world. But I do think I have some experiences with what we are talking about. My background is as a national librarian in Norway. The Norwegian National Library, I dare say, is the most digitized national library in the world, and one of the most digitized libraries of all kinds in the world. In many ways, it's only health libraries that can compete, because you are so needed in the work of life and death that digital tools was taken into your world long before public libraries did the same. But for the National Library of Norway, a short background. In 2004, the library decided to digitize its entire collection, based on a very, very simple analysis. It said, or we said, in the future people will expect to find information and knowledge online. If our collection is all the books, all the newspapers, all the journals ever published in Norway, but it's also all broadcast, all music, all film, all sound, all posters, every flyer, anything produced for the Norwegian public, including the web pages. If that collection is going to be relevant in the future, it needs to be online. Third point, if it's going to be online, we need to digitize it all. And fourth point, if we're going to digitize it all, we need to do that industrially. It will not be a question of choosing which book, which newspaper, which film is the best or most important to digitize. It will be a question of volume. How can we most efficiently digitize this collection? This means that today in Mo i Rana, 500 kilometers north of you, on the polar circle, we have 130 people working on scanners as part of the National Library, and alongside then about 80 IT developers. More than 200 people employed the last 20 years only digitally, only working with digitally. We have created mass production lines for digitization. We have long time ago digitized every one of the 700,000 books published in Norwegian book history. We are in 2 or 3 years going to come to the point where every newspaper ever published in Norway will be digitally accessible. We have 1.8 million radio clips. We have about 200,000-300,000 journals, 8 million photos, and it goes on and on and on. We are more than halfway through the collection. I'm thinking about 2/3 at this point. We have now also been assigned the task of digitizing all the material in the Norwegian archives and museums that is document-based, which means that we will take the entire Norwegian cultural heritage and make it accessible. And my point with this is that the digitization process is just the starting point for access to knowledge. In 2010, we created a collective licensing agreement with the Norwegian publishers and authors organizations that give free access to every book published before the year 2000 for all Norwegian IP addresses. It is OCR treated, it's searchable, it's readable, you can open it, you cannot publish ebooks or create new material, you cannot steal it basically. It's a streaming service. In 2016, we got a new Legal Deposit Act that gives us the right to have a legal deposit, not just of the physical objects and the digital objects that are produced, but also the digital that creates the physical, which means that we do no longer have to digitize books, or new newspapers or new journals, because we get the PDF. In addition to the physical, we can choose. At the same time, we got the right, as the only national library in the world, I believe, to give digital access to our entire collection, to research and documentation. That means that every researcher at every university, at every high institution of higher education in Norway, will, through his or her personal login, have access to our entire collection from their offices, from their computers, from their mobile phones. They can search every book, every newspaper, every journal. They can search 1.8 million radio clips. They can search the broadcast. They can see the films. They can search the music, the sounds. They can read the letters of Ibsen or whatever they would need. It's all there for everybody at the same time, as long as it's used for research and documentation. And in 2023, right now, all this means that the digital library of the National Library is the National Library. NBNO is the National Library for 99% of our users. This is the National Library. They do not have a relation to our physical building at Solli Plass in Oslo. They do not meet our staff. They do not lend books or material. They use the digital library. So, the background for me talking about this is that the National Library of Norway is an actual digital library. We are not at the point where we are talking about the digital, discussing what the digital can be, what will happen, how will it change. We are beyond the change in many ways. This also means that we have experience. That also means that we have learned things. And some of that learning I want to bring to you today. So, what did we learn? Well, first of all, creating a digital library does not mean that you create users of a digital library. And secondly, giving access to information does not mean that people use information or know about information, fetch information, utilize information, and it by no means creates knowledge. So, the first thing we started doing when I began in my job 10 years ago was starting to organize knowledge. We needed to, and we still need to, as our number one task, our number one thing to do is to organize this knowledge. Because, as you all know, because this, as I said, is our vocation, if you have 50 books, you don't have a problem. You can find them, you can show them, you can love them, you can talk about them, and you can exhibit them even at your home. If you have 500 books, it's still doable. You can still work it out. You can still know where things are and have a personal relation with every book. If you have 5,000 books, well, then you need to be an adult to have lived long enough to have a relationship to all these books and know what they are. But if you have 500,000 books, you don't have a chance. 500,000 books physically is a wall of information that needs organizing. That's what libraries have been for, right? 500,000 online books is an even more difficult wall of information. Because exhibiting or having books on shelves gives you the possibility to have thousands of books in the same room. And you can do good exhibitions showing out books, and you can still in a bookstore, in a library, wherever, you can have hundreds of books that show that you can navigate, you can walk around them, you can find things. On this, on my screen, 3 books, 4 books, 5 books, that's it. On this screen, 20. This we know. Accessing more than those 20 or those 5 books, I need to do a search. And what I find is depending on the validity of my search, whether I know what I'm actually looking for, whether the search engine I'm using is good or not. Meeting 500,000 online books, so now 700,000 now, or 4.5 million newspapers online, which you do at our websites, or 1.8 million radio clips online, means that you meet a wall of information that basically makes you give up. Unless you're an extremely professional user. That means that our work with organizing knowledge digitally has not been about cataloging metadata, finding mark numbers or Dewey numbers. It's about creating digital services. Digital services that are usable for the user, that uses the experience and the tools of Google, of Spotify, of Amazon, of any commercial, now today TikTok, whatever, uses all the tools they have access to, they have developed to engage their users. At the same time qualifying the information you get, and at the same time making clear that professional users like librarians will find their metadata, will be able to organize information into knowledge, will be able to qualify the searches, and so on. This is not a simple job. This is a modern library, and we spent a lot of time of this. We have learned that in this work, the catalog cards, the mark cards, the potential bib frame, the traditional metadata of the librarians are by far not enough. We also learned some other things, and some of my staff will not be happy to hear that, but we have learned that libraries' metadata basically have one thing in common. Librarians' metadata from the last 2 centuries have one thing in common, and that's that they are rotten. As long as the metadata were ours, and the books were behind the counter, as long as it was an enigma to any other user how a librarian could find all these things. How can she do that? I come here, I ask, and suddenly she comes back with the right book. It's magic. Everybody could say, our metadata is perfect. It's so good, we need these metadata. When we transform these into digital metadata, they are open for everybody. And we see that they're not perfect, full of mistakes, but also we see that it was the librarian's interpretation of the metadata the combination of the librarian and the metadata that created the magic. The metadata in itself did not do that. You behind that counter, you knew the faults and flaws of your cataloging cards. You know the backroom of your library. You know where Dewey wasn't perfect. You knew when it would be misplaced and so on. All this you knew. And it was you only. We went to library schools to learn this trade, and we learned it then in the libraries we were, how it worked. That has changed. And we saw it when we digitized the cataloging cards, or we didn't digitize the catalog cards, but we transported the MARC data into our systems. Some of them are good, some of them we use for authorities, some of them are useless because we don't need the weight or the height of the books anymore. But some of it was inconsistent. So how do we fix that, and how do we create all the metadata we don't have, and how do we create systems of organizing information that people can use? Well, we use our own metadata. We use algorithms. Simple algorithms that can retract author, title, how many pages a book has, who published it, what's the ISBN, even on the publishing house, and so on. These metadata, these simple metadata, we can now extract them from the PDFs we get from the publishers with simple algorithms. In addition to that, if the book is published from a real publisher, we do not need that. We use the metadata the publisher provides, as do most university libraries all over the world today. I was at Berkeley 1 week ago. They use only the metadata that come from the publisher. Only. The only thing they add is the Library of Congress's system for books on shelves, how you organize them on the shelves. Of course, the publishers do not give the metadata for how you put it on your shelf. Except for that, they use that. But we have publishers who can't provide that. We use algorithms. We also use AI. But that's advanced. You do not need AI to do this stuff. But AI can extract for you synopses, themes. We use it for finding Sami-related information. Samis being the minority, national minority in particularly the north of Norway. Sami-related information is not information on Sami that could anybody find. It is content search. Does this book, does this publication, does this journal have anything in it that is relevant for our Sami bibliography? If so, the AI raises its hands and says, look here. And we hope to use the most effective tool of all, crowdsourcing. We have 2 to 3 million pictures, images on our webpage. We are digitizing between half a million and 1 million images every year. If we were to use human labor, librarians, professionally skilled librarians to put metadata on all these images, we would be bankrupt in a month. Nobody will pay for that. Nobody in the whole world. The AI does not provide what we need. It can tell us that there's a house and a goat. It can tell us that there is a boat, many mountains. Most people do not look for the internet to find images of horses, houses, or boats. They will look, for instance, for images from where I came from. They want place names. They want georeferencing. They want the time. Is it the 20s, 30s, 70s, and so on? Are there people on this image that we recognize? And most of you will be looking for relatives and friends. You do not look for strangers. The AI can recognize Norwegian politicians that are famous, but they cannot recognize my grandma. So what do we want to do? We want to crowdsource this. We want to use all the people all around Norway that are interested in local history, interested in what happens around them, and make them do it. in this, all these streams of metadata or knowledge organization, information organization, you can call it what you like. Tags, you could even call it. Basically, as you do online, you tag something. There's not that huge difference between tagging something and creating metadata for something. We don't like that, but for the user, that's what matters. All these are for us streams of information, streams of metadata that we want to add to our digital library, and we are adding to our digital library. And then comes the librarian question. But are they correct? Can we trust them? Can we trust the AI? Can we trust the algorithm? Can we trust these uneducated people saying who's on that image and where it is? Answer to that is no. Of course we can't trust them. But there are two things to add. First of all, we don't need to trust them. And this is important. In a digital library, things don't need to be correct. In a physical library, if you do an incorrect GUI in an old traditional physical library, and you put a book about Russian history under the plants of Norway, because you've done a miscalculation or shitty metadata on it, that meant that nobody would find that book except by chance, almost forever, unless you did the tidying of your shelves and a librarian saw, hey, it's misplaced, we need to put it right back, this is not right. If I take a book about Russian history and I tag it with this book is about the plants of Europe or Norway, that's not a problem unless it's the only metadata on the book. As long as I find it on Russia, it doesn't matter very much that it also shows up when I search for plants of Norway, because I obviously see at once this is not right. I'm not going to open that. But if somebody else has put Russia on it, it shows up in my Russia search, and then it's not a problem. That's the thing with tagging. Nobody goes online when you search in Google or Amazon or wherever you're searching for things and makes things right. They do not censor the tags of other users. They add their own tags. They add their own things to it. And the sum of this creates a pretty good search environment. And if we are honest with each other, we know that. Because when we go home in the evening, Norwegian librarians, we've been working with Uria, which is our search engine, on our Alma, which is the Ex Libris cataloging system we use. And we are looking for information for finding something. We're buying clothes for our kid, or we're looking for a concert. What do we use? We use Google. We have not invented the better way of finding my concert and the kids' clothes where there are no mistakes in the metadata. Because it works. I'm saying all this because this is the part of our world that changes the most. Access to information will go through the digital. How we create metadata or information architecture will change, and has already changed. Which means that the role of the librarian as it was, and I'm not talking about you guys, I'm not saying that this is your role, but the idea, the image, the role of the librarian as it was has changed. You go from being a judge to becoming a gardener. A judge says, this is right and that is wrong. And I know 100%. This is the Dewey number. In Norway, we had wars over Dewey. Not necessarily physical wars, but library wars. And they didn't end until the late 1990s, when we took the books off the shelves at the National Library of Norway. Because there was right and wrong. You will no longer be judges of right and wrong. You will be gardeners of metadata, of information, where there will be streams of crowdsourced, algorithm-made, publisher-produced, AI-produced, and librarian-produced metadata. And your role will be to help to create systems of information, services of information for users that makes it possible to navigate this as best as possible. That's not changing the role of the library. That's not even changing the role of the librarian. It is changing the tools of the librarian. And that's also my point. The catalog was a tool. A genius tool. Dewey was a tool. But not a raison d'être. Not the reason we existed. It was a tool. The AI, when people are tired of asking the Snap GPT, who am I, have you heard about me? Or asking it to write an essay for high school, which of course is very useful for pupils in high school and extremely annoying for teachers in high schools, but in general, totally useless in society. There's no job where you write essays for high school. So it doesn't have, that's why this will pass. Because in the end, you don't have that job. In the end of that, it will be a tool. And we see how it's already being utilized. At Stanford now, where I'm at the board, they're working to get a small AI model based on alpaca, which they developed themselves, to give answers to the library and for the researchers based on Stanford published material only. To define how can that do, what will it do for us? It will give us a tool where we don't only get a Google search with searches on words and relevance, but it can give us abstracts, it can give us extracts, and it can give us reference, a deeper search, but still a search tool. And still a search tool, I believe we will need to qualify. So, will we be necessary in the future? And the simple answer is yes. The library is a center of knowledge, as I said. It's not the cataloging system. It's the center of information. And it's not the result of an education or a library school. All these are changing tools that have and will change. So the question we then should ask ourselves is, do we need centers of information and knowledge? And you know as well as I, so I'm not going to say this because it's already library cliches, but in a world of fake information, fake data, fake facts, fake news, in a world of AIs creating images and texts, making Obama speak and say something he never said and all these things, we all know about this. Of course, we will need more than ever centers of information that is qualified, centers for knowledge and education, and people who can work with this. Agents for information, missionaries for education and knowledge. We will not need less of that, we will need more of that. The libraries are not in question. And nobody outside the libraries question you anymore. And this is very interesting. Because in the early 2000s, then people were asking, do we need libraries? Can't everybody access this for themselves at home? And politicians in Norway and other countries still ask that. In 2023, they don't. At least not in Norway, but also, as I can see, not internationally, not in the US. On the contrary, People make demands on the libraries. They say the libraries need to be modern, the libraries need to do this, libraries must do that, libraries must so, librarians must so, and so. Can libraries help us with that? What can libraries do? That's what they ask. So the question, are libraries needed, has been answered also in society. And if I take a sweep back to our National Library in Norway, we have gained users by digitization. And as I said, we have 100, maybe 1,000 times more users digitally than we have physically. But we have not stopped working physically. We still collect every physical item produced, as long as it's not something you just can print on your printer. Then we generally keep the digital. We still keep the old stuff that we have digitized. We still do more book lends for the national long-distance lending system, library-to-library lending, than we've done ever. We have 4 million books in a robotized system in Mo i Rana that sends books to all over Norway for every public library when they need a book they don't have for themselves. And we do more exhibitions, more outreach, more than we have ever done. We have more visitors at Solli Plass in Oslo, physically, than we ever had. Last year, we had half of every student of high school and college in Norway attending one of our lectures, physically or digitally. So, the idea that there is like a either or here, when you go digital, the old stuff disappears, is not right. And let's go to the public libraries of Norway, just to dive over there. Which year was the best year for public libraries in Norway ever through history? The answer is 2019. In 2019, 54% of the Norwegian population that year used the public library. 54%. In the good old 70s, the best year gave us 24%. People were not more educated in the 70s, not by far. People are far more educated today. Children in Norway have never read more than they do today. They have never read more books. Last test shows that they don't like it much, but they read. And what do they read? They hate reading on mobile phones. They would never touch a Kindle. They read paper. They want books on paper. School libraries of Norway tell us that the most important part, if you want children to read, is to have physical books in amounts. Why do all these people come to the library? Because the libraries of Norway have become centers for debate. They have become cultural institutions. They have become centers for meeting places for people and the local community, in addition to lending out books. Used to be good at film, used to be good at music. It's not happening that much anymore because there's kind of come something called Netflix and something called Spotify that is more efficient than us on that. But that was also just a period of our time. In the same manner as we were the first providers of free internet. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of people came to the libraries, public libraries for free internet. Now you get that on a cafe. People came to us for film and music. Not anymore. But the books, they come for the physical books still. Even with what I just told you about the Digital Library of Norway, of what you can find and what you can access. They still do. And what are the librarians there? They are still the same. They are the missionaries for knowledge, missionaries for education, missionaries for the book, missionaries for the fact-checking, the agents of information. Still the same, but with new tools. So, what about you then? What about the professional librarians? information libraries, academic libraries. What happens there? My short opinion is that your role is maybe the role that has been enhanced the most. Your role is the role that obviously will be more important in the future than ever. Google does not help qualify information. ChatGPT is not trustable. Libraries and librarians, they are tools for us. And librarians will have to be professional users. In the same manner as we created the cataloging systems, in the same manner as we created MARC, in the same manner as Dewey was created and used, these tools, these new information tools, will you have to be the professional users of. And you will have to take care of enormous amounts of data. And this is growing now. What happens at the university libraries in the US now is that suddenly the major question is no longer published material, how to get access to published material. The growing question is how to take care of research data. Because digitally you can create enormous amounts of research data, not just in natural sciences, but in human sciences and social sciences as well. This is what AIs, for instance, do. This is what algorithms do. This is what digitalization does. Enormous amounts of data. Where are the base raw data of a research study, and where are the derived data? Think researchers want to work with that? Think they think that's fun? Do you think they like to set up their servers themselves? To find the processing powers? To create the systems for organizing the difference between raw data and derived data? You think it's gone wrong already? Yes, it has. You think they are looking desperately into large research projects all over the academic world now to try to find a system to re-attract the raw data because they have blended them with the derived data, derived data, which means that all their work is now useless? Think that's happening now? Yes, it is happening now. At the university libraries, this will be the case. Do you remember Watson of IBM? You know what Watson had learned? There's not much talk about Watson these days. Watson had learned to recognize the font of the hospital that the files came from. Watson knew which hospitals had the dangerous cases of cancer and the light cases. So Watson could hit every time, but knew nothing about data and about cancer. This is just one example. Research now on AI is starting to become research on what has the AI learned. Why? Because it needs to be qualified. You need to know what this is. And a lot of this will, in my opinion, be organizing of knowledge. Organizing information, I mean. And transforming information to knowledge. This is librarians' work. And I think you can expand the role of the library, still being infrastructure, and help us, but help us in organizing the digital knowledge. Not just getting access to all the fancy things they sell outside here, of services, of press, Oxford Press, and that press, and that press, and that press, and all the journals, and all the articles, and research, and that too. But also the organization of digital data will be a librarian's work, in my opinion. So, I need to end this. Some things change. We know that. As I started out, there is a good reason why we ask all these questions. There are some silly reasons why we ask the question all the time. Why, how, what will happen to the library? Does it have a future? And there are some good reasons. And of course, organizing data changes totally when it goes digital, as I've tried to give examples of. And we feel that the world is changing. And of course, it's annoying when Google does things that we used to be the only ones that could do. But some things don't change. First of all, books are still on. And I'm saying that not because I'm a book fetishist. I am a book fetishist, but that's not the reason I'm saying it. The reason I'm saying it is that the book has been declared dead for 30 years now. Since the first web pages came up online, wise guys, mostly guys, women have a tendency to read more. Wise guys have said that the book will die. Paper book is dead, it's forest. Let the trees grow. It's 30 years now. It's about time we basically said that is not true. And it hasn't been true for 30 years. So we need to put that in mind, that all these futuristic dystopias from a book fetishist perspective doesn't need to be true. When people say everything changed, it doesn't mean everything changes. It just means that somebody are in love with change. Kindle users are mainly men in my age or older who fell in love with tech in the early 90s. So, what doesn't change? Centers of information are needed. They were needed in Alexandria 3,000 years ago, and they are needed now. They have changed in those 3,000 years, and they will change in the next 3,000 years, but they will be needed. And digital centers of information are still libraries, and are still librarians' work. And information must be free. And this is extremely important, because libraries, we compete with publishers now. We compete with Google. We're going to compete with Elon Musk. We're going to compete with a lot of idiots who want to make money from data because they have read that data is extremely important and data is the new gold, and they're thinking they're going to find some way to get rich from data. And what they want to do is to own data and not give it away. Information must be free. In two ways. It must be free so everybody can access it and you don't keep and restrict and censor information. And it must be free so the users can have access to information no matter what their earnings are, no matter where they live in the world. This is libraries, right? This is the difference between us and all those idiots. Our call, our role, is not just to have information, to give knowledge. Our role is to have free information. For researchers, for the public, for the nation, and for the world. That hasn't changed. And that hasn't become less important. And to add something more, we can also and should also be the agents against piracy. Because some people want to steal information and get rich from it. And their name is Google. And they say, yes, it could be free, we should have it, and it should be free for everybody. Not mentioning that they will make billions on this, while the authors and the publishers and the researchers and the libraries and the bookstores will be left alone. So we should not just be agents for free, but also agents against piracy. And we can be that. And Information will need organizing also in the future. I talked a lot about cataloging. Most of you haven't touched a cataloging card in your life, I'm hoping. But I'm using it as an example. Rhetorical, yes. But as an example of what changes. The things that change is the way we do it, the tools we use, not the fact that we need to organize it. And that those tools becomes automatized, digitized, robotized doesn't mean that we are not the users of the tools. So information will need organizing, and lots of information will need lots of organizing. And someone needs to be the agents of information, knowledge and education. Because people do not access it by themselves. As I told you about the National Library, nobody goes to the National Library to find information on their own. They will go there because they are guided there, because they are lured there. We fool them into it. That's what we've done always. We make people read. We make people access information. And librarians will be the custodians of knowledge and the agents for spreading of knowledge and the missionaries for knowledge. This will not change. And we will always be few. And we will always feel a bit lesser. And we will always feel a bit forgotten. And we always feel that we should have been more and the world should have understood how important we are. That won't change. But we will be important. And this is important. And we should stop asking ourselves if we are needed and start telling the world why we are needed. Thank you.